The Dallas Cowboys have hired a coach that almost guarantees that they'll be running a 3-4 next season. We'll tell you what that means next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us the #1 sports podcast network. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. He is Landon. That is Landon. Big shout out to Landon for filling in for me during Tuesday's show. I was out on paternity leave, didn't get fired by the Vikings, which of course is really good. Heard the joke on the show, but appreciate everybody for all the well wishes. On today's show, Landon, we've got a busy one. The Cowboys continue to upgrade this coaching staff on the defensive side of the ball. We're going to talk about Marcus Dixon, who is officially hired as the defensive line coach. But I want to talk about a new hire that came out late on Tuesday night, Chidera Uzo-Diribe, a outside linebackers coach at Georgia, who will be filling in the same capacity for the Cowboys in 2026 under Christian Parker. What do you think of the hiring?
Well, first of all, I mean, just from a pedigree standpoint, hard to beat a better positional coach than a outside linebacker edge coach from the University of Georgia, who's been there during the tenure of the Kirby Smart era of Georgia. Pretty high praise, a pretty highly elevated spot if you're gonna go down into the college ranks to grab a position coach. Definitely one of the spots that you would probably want to raid, right? And just to kind of even further that pedigree, he took over that job from Dan Lanning, who is the current Oregon head coach, who had them all the way up in the college playoffs as well. So yeah, a guy that clearly has a lot of experience, has worked with a lot of NFL players, having been a defensive coach at Georgia, lots of first round picks, including Nolan Smith, and worked with Walker last year and Williams, despite them not necessarily playing outside linebacker, because he is kind of the designated edge rusher, technique guy. Again, it's interesting that and it's noteworthy, and I'm sure we'll get into this next, that he was hired and came from a position that was called outside linebacker coach, right? Not defensive end coach, right? And I think that kind of is an indication of exactly the kind of skill set that they're going to be looking to deploy on the edge starting next year, which I think is, kind of indicating a shift from where they were this last season in 2025. And really since, for a very long time, it feels like.
And we should mention he is a former Colorado Buffalo who played defensive end throughout his career. He was signed as an undrafted free agent, I believe with the Saints, if I remember correctly. And he's actually related. I think he's first cousins with Osa Odighizuwa, who you'll remember from the Giants, number 72. Yeah. So he's got a long history of being around the game. He's very young, which is kind of a trend with Christian Parker, but he's also somebody who really accelerated kind of in this path to coaching, where it was 1 year he was at TCU. Actually, it wasn't even a year, it was a month. And then he got hired at Georgia. Coincidentally, those two teams met in the national championship game that year. But he's somebody who has risen up the ranks really fast. And to be a outside linebacker coach in the NFL with this limited of a coaching tree, I think tells you a lot about him.
Yeah, not to date myself too much, but I saw his birth date and I was like, oh, I actually am conscious of what that date was. And this is a very, very young coach. And I it's just shocking to see that you're getting 33-year-old coaches now in these ranks, whether it's head coach or just these position coaches. But then this has really been a trend with the Cowboys. Obviously, they, especially on the defensive side, they have gone out. Their defensive coordinator is obviously very young, but the rest of the hires that they've made so far have all been, I think the oldest one was 45. So,
and that's ancient. Anybody 45. Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's old.
Please, let's enough of that, please. I do think it's obviously a trend, and I think it's if you're going to get teachers, guys who are going to be hands-on, you want guys that have played the game. You want guys, especially I think on the defensive side, right? Like you want guys who will be hands-on and be physical to kind of show you the techniques physically. And I think that's probably some of the appeal with the guy that we'll talk about a little bit later in the show as well. So I think they've clearly got a archetype that they're looking for with these position coaches, and they're following it to a T.
The other thing that I find fascinating is that you're seeing more specifications at the, on the defense, right? It used to be you'd have defensive line coach, linebacker coach, secondary coach, and maybe you would have a cornerback coach, an assistant defensive line coach. To have a outside linebackers coach, pretty rare even in today's NFL. There are a lot of teams that just they don't invest that many bodies into one, spot on defense. I think it's interesting that Christian Parker now has a cornerback coach, a defensive back coach. We're going to talk about their defensive line coach here in a little bit. They're going to get a linebacker coach at some point, and now you've got a guy just to focus on the outside linebackers here.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this. I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit in the next segment too, I think. But I think with this kind of new defense that they're moving to, the positions of defensive tackle and edge, however you want to define that, are going to even widen, like their kind of responsibilities and the way that they're played. The differences are going to be even broader, and I think having specific coaches there to teach you kind of all the techniques, and like we talked about, especially with on the edge, right? Because you've got to now. You're not just getting upfield. You're not just going after the quarterback or just playing the run on the way to the quarterback, right? Like we've seen previously in these defenses that the Cowboys have had. You're going to be asked to do a lot more things. You're going to ask to be a more versatile player. You're going to be asked to drop into hook and into the flat zones on fire blitzes, and you're going to be asked to sim pressure. You're going to be asked to maybe even two gap on the edge. Like, because we're going to have a defensive line that, I mean, we don't know yet. Again, all this is yet to be confirmed. But based on the hiring that we're seeing, it feels like this is going to be a very varied front. And if you're going to have a very varied front, you got to have defensive players that have a wide variety of techniques, because you're going to be asked to do a bunch of different things when you're deployed. And I think, it's like I said, the job responsibility between defensive tackle and edge used to be, hey, we're both getting upfield as hard into this gap as quick as we can and try to disrupt things. Now there's a little bit more nuance here, so you need to kind of separate out those positions a little bit more.
Well, and that's why when I thought of Georgia, you think of their outside linebackers, and again, a lot of these guys moved around a lot, but like Michael Williams and Trayvon Walker and Jalen Walker, like these are not guys that are in a wide nine and they're just pinning their ears back and getting upfield like a Rod Marinelli would have loved, right? Instead, they're guys that are doing all the things that you mentioned, where you're having to drop into zones, you're rushing, you're being sound against the run. And again, that takes a lot of effort and a lot of work to do that job really well. And I think that's why you're seeing somebody like him get hired. And I also wonder, we saw a couple teams do this across the league. Like, I wonder if the Cowboys are going to hire a slot coach, a slot cornerback coach. I think it was maybe Tennessee that hired a nickel coach, because that job is so different than what an outside cornerback is. I don't think it's the worst idea in the world to get somebody in there who specializes in coaching that one position.
It's a unique position, right? And it's a position that nowadays is a starting position. And as we get further and further along, you look at teams like Seattle that are in the Super Bowl, they're playing nickel as often as they can. And they dare you to try to get them out of nickel, right? And they won't come out of it because they've got a really strong player. If the Cowboys get somebody that they feel like they want to play like that, full time, that may even increase the amount of they want to play nickel. And how does that fit schematically? How do they fit the run that way? You got to have a strong player who can come down and play the run. And then you got to have a system that can kind of support having all those light bodies on the field all at once.
All right, let's talk more about the Chidera Uzo-Diribe hiring and what that means for the Cowboys defense in 2026. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted expert, start to finish, without all of the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get every deduction possible. So for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, all you have to do is file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. February can be a lot. Flowers, candy, stuffed animals, and so much to talk about relationships. And honestly, it can feel like everyone else has it all together in their love life. But here's the truth. Whether you're married, you're dating, you're single, or you're just focusing on you, most people are still figuring it out. And no matter where you are in your romantic journey, therapy can help you find your way. It can help you get clear on what you want, what feels heavy, and how to take off some of that pressure. Again, it's easy to assume that everyone has the perfect relationship, but most people are always working through something, and therapy can help you recognize patterns that might be weighing your relationships down. It can help you communicate better, set healthier boundaries, and stop carrying everything alone. BetterHelp has licensed therapists in the U.S., and they do the initial matching work for you so you can focus on your goals. And if you want to switch therapists, you can do it at any time. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That is betterhelp.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. If you haven't done so already, check out the new Everydayer Club. You're going to get ad-free access to the Locked On Cowboys podcast and so much more. Go to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, Landon, everything has been pointing toward the Cowboys moving to a 3-4, whether that's Christian Parker's background, some of the moves that they made, maybe even last year, at the end of the year when it came to more five-man fronts. Again, we're sitting here on February 4th. Is it your opinion that the Cowboys are going to be moving to a 3-4 this year?
I think it depends on what we're talking about, but yes, I think if you're talking about kind of changing the archetypes, the body types of a 3-4 defense, except with maybe the exception of a true nose tackle, I would say we'll see how that plays out. But I would imagine that, we are going to be looking at the kind of 3-4 in the sense that your pass rushers are your outside linebackers, right? You're going to have a lot of kind of 3 down linemen that are all kind of defensive tackle sized bodies. You're going to see a lot of that. I don't think that people should be thinking like 70s Pittsburgh Steelers or,
even 2000 Pittsburgh Steelers.
Even 2000
don't think
Pittsburgh
of it like
Steelers.
That. Right.
Yeah. Even though they interviewed a Steelers coach, I don't think
very different.
Very different. I think that what we're looking at more is a more of, because look, there has been some things that kind of have flown in the face of that. Marcus Dixon obviously came from had some time with Parker at Denver under Fangio, and Fangio plays some 2 gap, but more than that, he plays what's called gap and a half scheme, right? And I think that, to me, especially with the kind of players that you have, like, that is probably going to blend better with a little bit more 1 gap stuff that they'll do on pass rush downs, right? Because you got a guy who came from the Flores system, for goodness sake. So it's not like they're going to be planning on actually just lining up heads up on the offensive lineman and trying to to grab them and then peek around them with technique. I think it's more of they're getting upfield, they're attacking the shoulder, they're controlling the blocker with the shoulder, but then they're also having a fallback gap that they go to, that they're responsible to in the run game, and that allows them to play with kind of 3 downman looks in nickel kind of shell coverage that gives you an extra person to deploy either as a cover guy or in rush. So there is going to be times when you're going to see things like 3 defensive tackle bodies, and you're going to identify it with 2 outside linebackers, even rushing the pass, and you're going to say that looks like a 3-4, like I know it. but it's kind of deceiving. It's almost like they line up in that way, but the way that they're actually attacking the front, the way that they're coming off the line of scrimmage is very, very different than like Igor Olshansky came off the line when he was your 5 technique, that sort of thing.
Well, and again, I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but can I compare it and contrast it, or at least ask you to?
Yeah,
let's use that Wade Phillips defense that we saw in 2007, 2008. Now that had Chris Caney, Igor Shansky, I think Marcus Spears was still on the team. Those weren't really penetrating defensive tackles, but I think it probably is going to look more similar to that than if you saw like what Pittsburgh was running in the early 2000s with Casey Hampton and Aaron Smith and Brett Kiesel, and what that looked like.
I think, look, there's some LeBeau in Fangio stuff. So like, LeBeau is probably a grandfather to this system in some ways, right? Of course. But yeah, I think the more modern way of attacking this is even going beyond 1 gap and 2 gap, and it's using these kind of hybrids. And I think that's the other kind of Flores part of this influence too, right? Is that I wouldn't be surprised if you've got, a pair of 4 eyes and then a 0 technique who is truly 2-gapping on that play, but everybody else is trying to get upfield, right? Just so they can steal back a gap in that sort of way in the run game. So I just think that they're going to,
is it going to be more, assuming it's going to be more attacking rather than stacking and shedding and holding your gap, correct?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about if it's a 1 gap, in a pass rush 3rd down situation, yeah, I would imagine it's going to be, a lot of what we were expecting, what we're used to, right? Getting upfield, attacking the quarterback. In like the early down situations, it's a hybrid kind of, right? With 1 gap, you are literally engaging with the offensive lineman and trying to, separate and then peek at where the play is happening and then making the play there. That's in a 2 gap. In a 1 gap, you're trying to get in the gap. You're trying to get past the offensive lineman. In a gap and a half scheme, you're attacking the shoulder of the offensive lineman. So you're kind of doing both. You're not trying to just slip past them. You're trying to control the block by attacking one of the shoulders and then having enough wherewithal. I think they call it drag, or there's a technical term for it. Having the wherewithal to recognize that, the play is going backdoor from where I'm used to, and being responsible for the other side of that body. So being able to get over to that other gap if you need to. So it's a little bit of a hybrid. That's why you see kind of some 3-4 looking fronts, and they may do some true 2-gapping, but I would not expect that to be their base. I mean, beyond the fact that obviously nickel is the new base in defense.
Well, my question for you then is, okay, because I think if you're thinking of a 2-gapping, I don't think that suits Osa Odighizuwa that well. No. I think Quinnen can do it, but I don't think that's playing to his strengths. Do you think this version of their defense does play well to the strengths? Because the goal is to get the shoulder, right, and to explode off the line and kind of beat them to a spot. I would assume that's where Osa and Quinnen are going to thrive here.
Think about it as the difference between a speed rush and a speed to power rush, right? Like you're using the speed to get into the guy, and then you're controlling him if you need to get back and be responsible for the backside in the run game. But ultimately you are still trying to do a little bit of both. You're not just necessarily, building a wall and be standing still and not being moved. There's vertical displacement that is supposed to be happening by the defensive tackle. So that's all a long-winded way of saying a guy like Osa Odighizuwa with his explosive upfield movements, it's not just about getting in the gap now. It's about getting it at his shoulder explosively, and then using that kind of speed to power to like hump move him back or to displace the blocker so he can't complete the block on you.
One more thing from this 3-4. We saw like under Wade Phillips, you get into like a 3rd down and they would just always rush 5. And honestly, in a lot of early downs, they would rush 5. And that would be with Greg Allison, DeMarcus Ware, and then your 3-down linemen. Is that going to be the plan, do you think, on a lot of these passing downs? Or do you think we'll see them take a defensive tackle off the field and have your traditional nickel with 2 linebackers behind it?
Well, I think this is where it gets interesting, right? Like, because Fangio has a lot of kind of 3-2 nickel stuff, so it does account for having 3 defensive tackles on the field in a nickel situation. But I mean, obviously they play a lot of 4 down stuff too. I think that the extra kind of twist to this defense that we're going to see is some of the kind of Flores. I don't want to necessarily kind of Vance Joseph comparison, but like I think you're going to see more sim pressures, more blitzing maybe than what you saw from those kind of old Wade Phillips defenses. I think on 3rd down you're going to see the kind of that's where the secret sauce is going to be. I think it's mixing these kind of exotic Flores fronts or kind of different attacking blitzing fronts with the Fangio back end of it, the kind of Flores up front, Fangio in the back sort of situation where, and if you can find a way to mix those together, and that's kind of what we saw with the defensive coordinator the Jaguars had, and it had a lot of success kind of mixing Fangio back ends with really interesting fronts. So maybe that's what the plan is with Parker. That's kind of the last piece of the puzzle we still need to figure out.
All right, let's talk about the new defensive line coach for the Dallas Cowboys. He's got a great name, Marcus Dixon. We'll talk about his role with the defense next. Let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets, but that's where Gusto comes in to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR so you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one, remote-friendly, and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or the hidden fees. Unlimited payroll runs for just one monthly price, which means no surprise charges at the end of the month. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. One more time, that is gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. This episode is brought to you by Home Chef. As the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, and dinner is always a big one. Between busy work days, cold winter nights, and packed schedules, having an easy and reliable dinner plan makes a huge difference. And that's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fast, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And it's easy to see why. Meals come ready to fit your schedule, 30-minute recipes, oven-ready trays, or quick lunches. And for a limited time, Home Chef is offering our listeners 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. All you have to do is go to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Landon, the Cowboys have officially hired Marcus Dixon to be their new defensive line coach. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier, right? He's an interesting guy because he has experience with Parker at Denver under the Fangio kind of system. He has similar kind of experience under Flores at Minnesota. So it's interesting because those are very different kind of fronts, right? And we talked all about it in the last segment. And just to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the Flores side of things, I mean, it truly is kind of a very versatile, very multiple front, whereas Fangio in Denver especially was very kind of stagnant and very kind of like we talked about, they played a lot of 404, some stuff where the guys were reduced even further than that, but very straightforward. They didn't change it a lot. Fangio's constantly having guys attacking from all angles. They're lining guys up at different spots, and they're also using different techniques for each position. So it's not just like you're getting the same guy except he's in this gap and he's in this gap. Like they stress kind of the 3 technique. It has a different alignment than the 1 technique, and that in all the way out. So it's really a very interesting and broad experience that he's had over the last 5 years in the NFL, and 2 kind of extreme ends of the spectrum of defensive coaches. I am kind of fascinated to see exactly what the plan is here. Because I think the fronts and with what the Cowboys have already invested there, that's going to be the key to this defense if they're going to have success in 2026.
And one of the things that you read a lot about him is that he's considered like one of the best teachers, right? And I do think there's a lot of young coaches on the staff, Landon, and he's certainly not old by a coach. I think he's 41, but this is somebody who is really well respected, who again is going to be focusing, I think, a lot of the defensive tackles here. He's going to focus on the group as working together. But I wouldn't be surprised if right. I see him working a lot with defensive tackles. Yeah,
I agree, and I think that's it's about like teaching them the high hat, low hat, the kind of, hey, what are your eyes telling you, and what does that mean that you need to do? And again, in a system where they're going to be doing more gap and a half stuff, I mean, that's just going to be part of what they do. I just don't know to what degree, but that, I mean, I have to imagine for a lot of these back end coverages to work, you're going to want to play that. So just teaching that technique, which is a little bit different than some people have have learned so far. I think you want this kind of guy. And again, that's going back to that's why they hired the guys that they hired at the cornerback coach position, who has experience with quarters. You're hiring the guy who has expertise teaching the techniques that make sense for the kind of defense you want to play. And that's, again, pointing back to the clarity that we're getting in this hiring cycle.
It just feels so much like what we saw on the offensive side of the ball a year ago when Brian Schottenheimer was filling in, kind of building his staff. He wasn't just bringing back all the same guys that Mike McCarthy had. He wanted to go out and get guys that he thought fit his scheme. And that's why he went out and signed. They hired Clayton Adams to be the offensive coordinator. They brought in Connor Riley from the college ranks to be their offensive line coach. They signed Junior Adams from, I think it was Oregon, to be their wide receiver coach because they thought together these guys are going to run our scheme. And that resulted in one of the NFL's best offenses.
Yeah, you're pulling great coaches from the college ranks at a level where you have to teach these guys. And especially the day in NIL, it's already very professional. So it's not a very difficult leap for these guys.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen. Make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast so you get all of the latest episodes. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Cowboys ad-free plus members-only Discord access and so much more. Head over to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com to join the club. And for those of you on video, we can send you the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. And on audio, make your second listen to the Locked On NFL podcast. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.